When we talk about fruit, we see a continuum, just like when we talk about carbohydrates. And when we talk about fruit, we're also talking about a lot of things that people consider as vegetables. After all, tomatoes, cucumbers, eggplant, these are all fruits. Even beans and peas are fruits, technically. So what we want to look at is the glycemic load. And the glycemic load is much more exact than the glycemic index. For instance, with watermelon, when you eat it, it tastes very sweet. You say, wow, this is really sweet. I wonder if this is going to hurt me. But the fact is, watermelon's 98.5% water. There's very little sugar in it. So when you look at the glycemic load, it's well under 10. It's actually not going to bump up your blood sugar. That's what glycemic load measures. So if you want to bump up your blood sugar, junk food is the way to go, like those cookies you mentioned a minute ago. Of course, you feel good with high blood sugar, but it's not really good for you. So also, when you're looking at fruit, probably the best fruit is the most loaded in anthocyanins to protect the brain. That's what we're looking for, is blueberries, strawberries, blackberries. These have very little sugar, and they have many of the protective antioxidants. So it's a bit of a balance. With a diabetic, when you have excess sugar in the blood, the damage to the arteries, the eyes, the kidneys is mediated through free radical damage. But fruit is loaded with antioxidants. So if you can eat the low glycemic load fruits, which by the way does include pears, peaches, and apples, they're all below 10 on the glycemic load scale. So I like to look at fruit. Now, when you look at bananas, yes, they're very sugary. And I totally agree that they're picked unripe. We're lucky we live on a fruit farm in Maui, and our fruit is not picked unripe. In fact, we usually wait for it to fall from the trees. So that's my concept of carbohydrates. We should look for a slow release. So beans and vegetables have carbohydrates too, but the release is so nice and slow that little by little over time, you get a little sugar in your bloodstream, your brain uses some, your heart uses some, it gets used up or stored in your muscles. Then a little more gets into your bloodstream. These type of slow-releasing sugars, and did you know, it's fascinating, that apples and strawberries in a recent study were shown to slow the absorption of sugars even from sugar. So fruits can actually, if they have enough polyphenols, can slow the absorption of other sugars too at the same meal. Isn't that interesting? Thank you.
I just want to comment on that as well, because there's studies that will show, for example, when they were looking at diabetics and they were having oatmeal, and they used to say, well, don't put any fruit on the oatmeal because, you know, say if you're eating real steel-cut oats, for example, or maybe granola, and then is the blueberries, for example, that they would put in, would that spike their blood sugar? Would that be detrimental? So a lot of diabetics would not eat fruit. But what they showed in the study was that, you know, when you put a little bit on there, you know, like even people when they get a muffin or something, that's not a serving of the fruit. In fact, it's a lot of sugar and stuff. But what they showed is that if you actually had a serving of the blueberries, it had the opposite effect, because you do get all the antioxidants, polyphenols, protein, and fiber that is needed to help control that glycemic index or spike. So I'm a proponent. I actually recommend people eating fruit. Now, I don't believe in like just people being a fruitarian and just eating only fruit, for example. And I do like people mixing things, like, you know, especially when there's a little bit of a high glycemic with some of the seeds or nuts, just a little bit, not too much, but we still need some of those to help balance that glycemic index, and also, you know, getting that immediate kind of rise in their blood because people are hungry, and then having maintained with a little bit slower release of getting a little bit more of the protein or fats. So when I think of like a trail mix, or you know, sometimes people eat a granola, that's almost kind of a nice concept, because sometimes the dried fruits can actually have a higher glycemic, it's a little concentrated in those foods. But when we have some of these other things that actually slow the glycemic index because they're super high in fiber, then that's a nice, wonderful balance. But because when we look at all these things that we give to help then treat some of these conditions, it's from the same foods that we're telling people to restrict. So I actually encourage it. Now, the amount, some people can actually overdo it, right? Because when people get all plant-based and they just want to do just only this barrier, that's too much of one thing. I want to be spread in a broad spectrum, a rainbow color of foods, and not just, you know, we want to hit a little bit of all the categories, but not just only doing one or pounds of certain things and saying, oh, I'm going to go just carrot juice, for example.
You have to remember that when we look at these things, there is definite clinical reasons we believe these things. It's not as if I only read empirical evidence and only do what empirical evidence says. Matter of fact, I think almost all science is bogus. Let's be honest with you. The majority of science, somebody comes with a check and literally says, this is the outcome I want, and of course that group of scientists basically make that outcome happen. Now, very rarely does somebody give a large check and say, help humanity, do what you can. So if you really look at who funds these studies, even good-natured people doing good things who are purporting that they're supporting plant-based living, I congratulate them, but those studies can be manipulated. That's why I only read meta-studies now. Meta-studies are they've done 10, 20, 100, 200 studies, and they may have 200 outcomes, but what we literally see is that they find the same thing in 200 studies, they just don't report that. The outcome's different. Because the check basically said, that's the outcome we want. But I'm not against science, I'm just against most science. You said something I don't want to forget because this, to me, it's important. So you said at the Hopkins study that was done on the ketogenic diet when they completely removed all sources of sugar, that the ketones actually created genesis?
Yes, but it's not a Hopkins study. So there was at the Hopkins, there was the conference because we were exploring ketogenic diets.
Yeah.
So, at first we thought that was a good thing, but what we found like later on as it continued on, that there was this growth, but we couldn't explain that. In the conference, they just thought that it was an observation. But when they looked at the ketogenic diet now in multiple animal models, it shows that it actually will stimulate growth of cancer cells.
Now, was it the animal-based ketogenic diet or the green ketogenic diet?
Well, that's the thing. It's easy to put an animal on a ketogenic diet because you're just refusing and removing. Because chow, what we know, is a highly glycemic food, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But to remove all of that, right? So it's just looking at can ketones, regardless of plants, because plants will have an anti-inflammatory effect, antioxidant effect, for example. But we're looking at just can ketones as itself, regardless of how the body's producing ketones. Can a cancer cell use ketones as fuel? Absolutely.
See, the interesting thing is we now all know that meat raises the insulin levels more than carbohydrates.
True.
So that would be the differential in me that would be interesting. So did they differentiate green, non-butter, non-animal fat in these studies?
It's chow, so you just restrict the chow from having carbohydrate and turn it into ketones.
So it didn't matter, it wasn't animal or...
It was not, because...
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
That's interesting stuff.
And let me explain, because when I see cancer patients right now, most of them are getting their information from social media and Facebook, right? And there's tons of companies, there's tons of people who are selling products on the internet saying, you must do this because everybody kind of knows sugar is bad for cancer on some level. So if we want to go push hard on this ketogenic diet, now again, there's aspects where we can add more nutrients into the diet to actually have I know that there's vegan ketogenic kind of concepts, right? And we've seen that in other countries kind of working with that on some level. But the idea is that when people just shift to a ketogenic diet, I've not seen clinically, and in fact, we just see people accelerate that.
Yeah. 10 times.
In the animal model, yes. And personally, we don't see the improved benefits of people doing a ketogenic diet with cancer, But I just want to explain it because it's more complicated than just doing the right thing, is that sometimes we're trying to do the right thing so extreme, but guess what? Some things are smarter than all of us. I hate to admit that, right? Because we're like, what do you mean?
You mean the universe is smarter than us?
That's...
This point is really good. We do need to individualize the approach. I personally, for people, I have a treatment and then what I call maintenance. So I don't really push the ketogenic diet very much, except I know for those 3 weeks, getting people's brains working really does happen. And I think that the key is to understand it. The other thing is, I will be talking about how to individualize your diet, but on chromosome 19, it actually tells us how much carbohydrates and fats and protein we need to have. So we have to individualize it. But there is a difference between a treatment diet and a maintenance diet, and I think that's the key. I actually don't spend a lot of time treating cancer. I refer them to Brian and Anne Marie at Hippocrates. My focus is how do we get people to their optimal health and state of well-being. And I'm kind of using a term there because this optimal health has to do with really the power to overcome all obstacles, the growth of character, clarity of mind, flexibility, and really having energy all day long. So that's kind of what our goal is, and for everybody it's really different. So we're talking two different things. We're talking treatment, and actually part of the question is, where does treatment become lifelong?
The question is what we should eat. And I guess we only want to know the most specific thing. Name the foods. Don't use the word carbohydrate. Don't say protein. Don't say fat. Just tell us exactly what to have for lunch and keep it direct and simple, because more or less what everyone hears you saying is sprouts and green leafy vegetables are the only things you're saying to eat. And people are saying, I'm going to have chicken tomorrow. So what if there's no answer, that's okay also. But I mean, what do you? We don't want diabetes. We don't want cancer. We don't want dementia. So directly, just you name the foods. What is for lunch and dinner tomorrow, and be direct with nothing else.
Fingernails.
Okay, first of all, if somebody came and told me that, I'd say you're in the wrong place. Because you got to be able to trial and error and explore what gives you optimum energy and well-being. And you have to be motivated. Telling people this, unless you're in an emergency, doesn't go so far. As people get in touch with who they are, that non-causal love and peace, that provides the motivation to really search and do the right thing for yourself and understand you are a unique individual. Obviously, I've been a vegan since 1973, and live fooder 10 years later, okay? And I have seen that's the optimal diet. Now, we change with age. That's another problem with give me a formula. So what I learned at 60 is that you actually need more protein. So when you're 45 to 65, high protein, and particularly animal protein, actually doubles your rate of mortality and quadruples your rate of cancer. So you want to go lower protein. But at 65, and I actually made the shift because I was working on doing pull-ups, and I was stuck at 25. And as soon as I added a little bit more protein, which is more like spirulina and blue-green algae, I really went up to 100 pull-ups. How did that happen? One little adjustment. So we need to think not so simplistically that there's some magic list of foods. We have to individualize it according to our genetics and according to our age, and we'll be talking about some of that tomorrow. That being said, generally speaking for myself and generally for people, I look at people having 10 to 15% protein in their diet, mostly with nuts and seeds. And you can add Brazil nuts if you want because it's got the silica in it and so forth. But the point I'm making, selenium, the point I'm making, you have to individualize it. So I would never give a person exactly this is what you should have. We need somewhere with the diabetes, but in general longevity, 25 to 45% of our diet of more fatty type foods, which are nuts and seeds and avocados and olives and so forth. And then in terms of carbohydrate, again, somewhere between 25 and 45%, and I'm going to say the complex carbohydrates. And leafy greens are all the foods are a mix of things, right? So leafy greens are protein, and they're also carbohydrates. So people have to kind of work out that in the range according to their constitution. I think that's the key thing. The motivation comes from loving yourself enough to want to heal yourself. So my work is really coaching them to do that. Like, I'm on your team, we're going to do this together, and our goal is optimum well-being, optimum mental clarity, optimum physical strength, optimum physical flexibility. So we kind of have some goals with that. So it's an inner strength and outer strength. So that's kind of a broader way of thinking it. And I probably would kick him out of the office because I'm not going to give you a list of things. You got to find that out yourself. Here's your range. And that motivation is very, very important. You have to do the trial and error because we are unique individuals. We're not a bunch of cows. There's not one formula for everybody, which is a key of how to individualize that. So I work with people who are open to exploring the fact that they're unique and how to get the right combination, if you see what I'm saying.
Of course, it depends where you are and where you want to go. We work with people who are usually eating very poor diets. So we work with them, instead of saying, go here, we work with them step by step, usually month by month, to say, how can we up-level your diet? If they're eating bacon and eggs and hash browns for breakfast, there's lots of ways to up-level that. If they're eating hamburgers and French fries for lunch, no problem getting a better lunch. So we generally try to get people to move forward. And I suggest to all of you, think of ways that you can up-level your diet. Think of ways that you can make it a little bit better. So for instance, for breakfast, instead of going all the way to sprouted oats, we usually eat soaked oats. And we usually put in berries and avocado, believe it or not. We live on an avocado farm on Maui, so, but the avocados we eat, which are fruits, by the way, but very low in fruit, in sugar. Very low. So that might be something that we have for breakfast. It's very satisfying. I generally have a few nuts and seeds after that, and that tends to make it last longer, the 4 hours until lunch or whatever. For lunch, one of my favorite foods is when my wife makes a massage kale salad. And you strip off the kale and chop it up and then massage it for a while. It's good exercise. And then she adds a little bit of sesame tahini, and she could do this better than I can, a little lemon juice and various other things, hopefully some radish sprouts or some other delicious additions to it. And that kale salad is amazingly satisfying. I feel like it builds energy throughout the afternoon. And there's a lot of calcium in the kale, and there's a lot more in the tahini that you put on. I just like a little bit. So that's a lunch. Now, if I'm working really hard, or if you're working really hard, then you may need more carbohydrates of the slow-moving variety. And that could be anything, perhaps chunks of purple sweet potatoes in the kale salad. If you're going to need to expend a lot of calories, you're going to need to take some in. The key is to keep your blood sugar steady and level and in a good range the whole time. Not no blood sugar, not too much blood sugar. So you're aware of that, because if you eat too much, and if you eat too little, then you're going to get a little bit low. And I will admit here, it's hard sitting next to these wonderful doctors, that I do eat cooked vegetables for dinner. Oh! Ruining the beautiful vegetables.
So do we lots of times.
And we did invent fire, by the way.
And by the way, a lot of these vegetables are things like tomatoes and eggplant that are really fruits. A lot of the things we call vegetables, like cucumbers, are really fruits. We like to have some beans at dinner. I feel like beans are the satisfying, deeply nourishing layer of a vegan diet. And a vegan diet without some form of beans, whether they're sprouted or cooked or somehow or green into the diet, really important to give you the satisfaction, the essential fatty acids, very slow-moving carbohydrates. This is really important for me. So there's actually a direct answer, Stephen Shore, to your question. Thank you.
If I'm now, let's say I'm facing cancer, and I'm learning that if I can stay 100% raw, I can do dehydrated vegetables, and I can make crackers and even a veggie burger in there out of sprouted grains and sprouted beans. And I realized that this is what I need to do for some time. Then if I get educated enough, I probably will do that. But then when I'm done with that, let's say 2 years later, this is what we all find, Gabriel, Brian, and I, and anybody that's working with living food, that it takes at least 2 years of stricter living. Then we can go over to 80% raw and 20% cooked. So here comes the bean soups, the sprouted beans. I make bean soups. I use root vegetables. You know, you have taste buds, and they're going to cause trouble in the beginning. And, you know, what our guests, the first week, they think the food is bland. And the third week, they tell our chefs, why didn't you serve this food that first week? I would have loved it.
It's the same food.
Same food. So we change. And, you know, plus you have taste receptors throughout your whole body. And there is 25 different ones for bitter. And there is one each for sweet, savory, salty. And they actually make nitric oxide for you to be a part of your immune system. So you were used to sweet, savory, salty, and sour. Yes, you were used to that. So then we kind of have to find that in the living food world, the plant food world. It's different because now we don't use salt. We don't have black pepper, white pepper. We have hot peppers. We have cayenne peppers. We have sodium in the juice from celery, and we use some nama shoyu in our condiment table for people or brags that they can add, because your taste buds will have to get used to the difference. But the world kind of is really big. Everything that we ate cooked before, we can eat raw. We eat raw asparagus, raw corn, raw cabbage. We eat raw squash, you know, raw sweet potato. We make dishes out of that. So the world kind of opens up. And of course, sprouted beans. That's a part of the things that we use every day and that you can make dishes out of. And then eventually, you go over to 80% raw, 20% cooked. And I love the dehydrator because so many things that I can make in there, like crackers. I can take, for example, zucchini and cut it thin slices, put it in a bowl. I can put a little bit of Bragg's or namasoyu, water, and lots of hot spices and garlic, which I love, and then let it soak a little bit, and then I dehydrate them in a temperature that Dr. Howell found that at above 115, you kill enzymes. So if you can keep your dehydrator very low, that's like 44.
Cook on the stove below 150.
Yeah, you can cook on the stove below 150. As long as you can have your pinky in the water.
A food thermometer.
That's that's the best food for thermometer, because if it's too hot, you can't keep your finger in there. So, you know, you have a lot of tools that you can use. And we use, of course, soups. We use the blender. We don't use the blender for juice. We use a juice machine for that, like a wheatgrass juicer. But I can use the blender to making soups, put avocado and vegetables, and spice it up, and squash, sweet potato, you know, to make different flavors. So we teach that at the Institute. Of course, it's something. If you've never seen it, you really need to take classes, or you find classes here with people that are teaching. So, you know, so let your taste buds be used to different flavors. Thank you.
I'm going to try not to be academic or confusing. I mean, I saw the enthusiasm when you thought, gee, these guys are going to tell me exactly what to do. So I'm going to do the best I can, but everything these wonderful people told you is true. That we are individual, we have different tastes, different habits, different history, so that's an account. What we do know, if you look at the work of Dr. Longo, University of Southern California, the work we've done at Hippocrates, the general rule is don't eat anything or a lot in the morning, eat a lot in the middle of the day, and very little at night, if anything. So Anna Marie and I are down 5 days a week to 1 meal a day. Am I saying you should do that? No. I used to eat like an animal when I started to eat raw food. I wasn't emotionally ready to give up everything, so I was trying to get the substitute of the veggie burger and the macrobiotic diet that was like 10 pounds of grain every time I ate it. So that transition you have to take into consideration, and there's not you're a good boy or a good girl, you're doing the best you can on this stuff. What we would tell you to eat at Hippocrates, since I say the heavy meals in the middle of the day, and what we know from 11:30 in the morning to 1:30 in the afternoon, hydrochloric acid is most active. So the body's chemistry is actually saying to you, put protein in at this point. So the best time to eat proteins, the nut loaves, the seed sauces, the croquettes, the burgers you're making out of nuts or seeds or gathering of nuts and seeds, hopefully always germinated first to make them digestible. Remember, the proteins are broken into amino acid, carbohydrates to simple sugars, and fats to essential fats, easier essential fats. And that's when you eat heavy stuff. And then at night, try to eat between 11 and 6. In the middle of summer, it could be 11 and 7, 11 and 7:30, because the way our bodies were designed is through the habits we had. Remember, people were nomads. They went to sleep when the sun went down, and they got up when the sun came up. And then people were farmers, and they went to sleep when the sun went down, and they got up and then all at once the Industrial Revolution came, and they invented this damn thing called lights. And now they have round-the-clock factories, and we're watching television, the late-night shows at 12:30 at night, and the body's going completely out of its mind. So what we do know is we're still that creature that wants to eat heavy in the middle of the day, very little at night, and the longevity factors from Longo's research is phenomenal. They don't even change diets. They tell people, keep eating your junk food diet, just eat at these times, and there is shocking, overwhelming, clear evidence that that makes them healthier. Now, can you imagine when we start to eat healthy food and do it within this range? And, I was guilty when I first became a vegan of eating until the minute I went to bed, because I was filling up the emotional void I had. I would go to bed and, thank God I didn't discover banana ice cream that you make out of frozen bananas. I would have probably died from an overdose of that. So I think to answer you best you can, heavy in the middle of the day, nuts, seeds, grains, beans. By the way, today we had cooked sweet potatoes at lunch, and we had, all the rest was raw. We drank very large 22-ounce green juices, lacking the sprouts that we put in. At Hippocrates, half of them are sprouts. One green drink, that's 12 ounces, has the protein the average person absorbs in 3 days. So what that does to regulate blood sugar is like stunning. We take a glucometer before and after, you freak out. You can't believe it's the same person. So that's the general rule. It's about when you eat and eating those foods, and lighter at night and little, if nothing, in the morning.
I think the key, I hope people are getting, that there's a range in their perspective, and you're kind of moving forward with some idea of where you're going, which would be optimal vitality and health, but you start with where you are and you take one step at a time, which is really what you were saying. And I think the key is don't stop because you did 1 or 2 steps. It's the whole idea or vision of being, I'm going to say, a master of your life. Okay, if you're going to be a master of your life, you're not going to go halfway. You want to master food, master, every aspect of your life, to be fully creative and be fully attuned. Those are kind of the bigger picture. And food is part of that picture, and we do want to be able to master it so it doesn't have any control over us, actually. And I think that's a way of thinking about it.
When you set out on a journey, you know where you're going to end up. So I think what we have to understand, and all of us are saying this in a way, Some of us are just trying to get people to come off a really bad diet to a little bit better diet. But I think giving people the understanding of this is the ultimate platinum level. In my book, Life Force, I speak about platinum level. Who's that for? People fighting catastrophic disease and people who are Olympic athletes, because that's who I train as well. So I use the same kind of a lifestyle for a gold medal Olympian that I do for a person fighting stage 4 cancer. And so it's not silly not to tell them that. It's silly not, basically, if you didn't tell them that, it would be silly, I should say. But you have to give some room to the people. You think when people come to us and they're fighting a disease, heavy disease, HIV or multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's, I yell at them if I find them eating cooked food? No, you don't yell at people. You basically encourage them and you can say, okay, it would be better for you not to, and here's the reason for it. So part of this is self-forgiveness too. You're going to fumble. Everyone fumbles. Anna Marie and I fumbled. You know, at the beginning, we all made mistakes. It's dusting yourself off, getting back up and walking. Now, things that I learned that filled me up are squashes. Winter squashes are amazingly good to fill you up. And what I love about them, they're mostly water. So you're getting high mineral content, a little bit of vitamin, and water. Take literally the seeds of them and eat those. Amazingly high in protein. And they have curative effects for cardiovascular systems, regenerating the phosphorus sheathing on the nerves, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Sweet potatoes, I mentioned that. Now, sweet potatoes, yams, and white potatoes are uniquely different families. And white potatoes are not big fans of eating cooked, although therapeutically, the center that Anna Maria directed in Europe juiced the organic white potato, let the starch, when you see how much starch, you'll freak out. It goes to the bottom, it's like ground up chalk. And drink that potassium rich. It actually helps reverse arthritis. The cooked ones create inflammatory problems. And this is the nightshade family. I went to Rutgers when they were doing that back in the 70s. And it's inflammatory. So there are lots of healthy foods that are heavy, will feel like the old meat, will feel like the soy burger, much better than the Beyond Burgers and the Impossible Burgers. At the beginning, if you eat them, God bless you. They're better than hamburgers. But the truth, these are not healthy foods. So you need to know, maybe you're not making sprouts now. You think, I ate sprouts? I was a macrobiotic. I wrote one of Cushy's books for him. Sprouts would have been too yin, too yang at the time. So just know where you need to go. So when you get on this voyage and keep working, it may take a month, it may take a year, it may take 2 years. If you're fighting a disease, learn to run fast in this direction.
You mentioned dairy products, and I made a little bit of a list here of things that I don't like about dairy products. I'll just go over it briefly. The casein, the major protein in dairy products, makes about 85% of the protein, is one of the strongest cancer promoters in the world. Antibiotics are a common contaminant of dairy products, perhaps not organic, but all of the others. Then there's endotoxins, those dead bacterial shells that trigger inflammation throughout the body in arthritis and in the brain. Then there's advanced glycation end products that form when cheese is aged, and these go into the brain and shower it with free radicals, destroying brain cells. Then there's the bioaccumulation of persistent organic pollutants like organochlorines and polychlorinated biphenyls. Then there's the thing about mucus. The beta-casomorphin 7, an addictive chemical in dairy products, creates more mucus. It actually creates more mucus cells, and they produce more and thicker mucus. As any of us know who don't eat dairy, if we're ever exposed to it, it creates this real gunky stuff. And then there's constipation. Common with any opiate, and beta-casomorphin, morphine, in dairy products creates constipation. I think it plugs people up much more than any other food. Then there's the increased prostate and breast cancer, tons of studies on this. Then there's the type 1 diabetes. It seems that the dairy triggers the death of the beta cells, especially in young people. There's also the fact that autism often reacts to the withdrawal of dairy. About 50% of autistic kids improve their behavior dramatically when dairy is removed. Then there's the phthalates, like bisphenol A, that get into the dairy from those tubes in the dairy. This is a nasty hormone chemical that would be good not to have. Not to mention insulin like growth factor 1, which is identical in cows and humans and promotes cancer. Then there's the recombinant bovine growth hormone, which they clip onto the cow's ears. This is a genetically modified hormone that gets into the dairy products and into humans. And of course, the high saturated fats of dairy products contribute to many diseases like heart disease, stroke, and diabetes, and of course, Alzheimer's disease and via vascular dementia. The extra estrogen in dairy products is a problem, and this is common because they keep the cows pregnant. Then there's the insulin resistance that is induced by dairy products. I won't mention new 5GC and anyway, and trans fats, which did you know that dairy cows create trans fats in their rumen through a biohydrogenation process, and that some people get as many trans fatty acids from dairy as they do from industrial produced oils. I just wanted to regale you with some good reasons to avoid this highly addictive substance. Thank you for listening.
That's a guy.
Just
He hit it out of the park that time.
just